Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Betsy May, and I'm one of the program staff at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. My unit currently oversees the program implementation of the Nonprofit Security Grant Fund. This afternoon, we're going to be providing information regarding the post-award process. I'm joined by my fiscal counterpart, Rachel White, who will be providing some important fiscal information related to your grants. While we will be providing you with guidance on how the post-award process works, additional information related to program implementation and fiscal requirements can be found within PCCD's Applicant's Manual and Standard Grantee Subconditions. As an awardee, it is essential for you to familiarize yourself with these documents to ensure that you are in compliance with PCCD grant requirements. Today we'll start with a brief overview of PCCD in case you're unfamiliar with us. We will then discuss quarterly program and fiscal reporting and project modification requests, otherwise known as PMRs. Additionally, we will briefly review the types of monitoring that may occur during your project, and finally, provide some helpful hints to ensure the success of your project. Since many of you may be unfamiliar with PCCD, we wanted to give you a brief overview of the agency. PCCD was established in 1978 through Pennsylvania state law and serves as the Commonwealth's justice planning and policymaking agency. Our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, to facilitate the delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of our communities. We are directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by 8 different advisory committees and 2 training boards. PCCD's responsibilities and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims' compensation, and training, among other responsibilities. If you are interested in learning more about these areas, I encourage you to check out our website at pccd.pa.gov. Here is a quick snapshot of the types of programs we support. The Nonprofit Security Grant Fund was established in 2019 and funding has been allocated within the adopted state budget every year since. If funds are included in this year's final state budget, we plan on releasing another round of funding in early fall. Again, congratulations on receiving a Nonprofit Security Grant Fund award. Some of you may have already been awarded and some are still working through the e-grants application process. As a reminder, a grant is not considered officially awarded until the signature page is electronically signed by all parties in eGrants and the application status is moved to Open Awarded. Once your application status is moved to Open Awarded, you are ready to begin your project. Now we are going to provide an overview of the post-award process. However, as we stated earlier, more detailed requirements of managing your grant can be found within PCCD Applicant's Manual. All subgrantees are required to submit quarterly program and fiscal reports throughout the life of the grant. Since these grants began on April 1, 2026, the first quarter will end on June 30th, 2026. Your first quarterly report will be due on July 20th. The program report provides PCCD with an overview of the activities that occurred. The fiscal report, a separate report, is where you will input the expenses paid during the quarter so that funds can be reimbursed. Grantees also have the option of submitting interim fiscal reports during the quarter to receive reimbursement sooner. Let's take a more detailed look at the program report. In eGrants, a program report should not be filed until after the quarter ends. Once a report is created, you will be required to answer if the project is on schedule or not and discuss why the project may not be on schedule. A separate section is also provided so that you can let us know what activities occurred. For instance, if you were still obtaining quotes during the first quarter, you can let us know that quotes were being made and provide a sentence or two on your future plans. There are 2 other sections that are standard on these reports, and both are not required, but their status must be set to complete before you are able to submit your report. If you would like to provide pictures or stories about your project, feel free to provide them in the attachment section. There are no performance indicators assigned to your grants, so all you have to do is go into this section and save it as complete. During the first quarter, you will be asked to certify that everyone listed on your grant in eGrants has viewed this presentation. You will be also asked to provide a code word that will be mentioned during the webinar. This section will only be present for your first quarterly report. Now I'm going to hand this over to Rachel to discuss procurement and the fiscal reporting process.
Procurement guidelines must be followed for all grant purchases. A micro purchase is the acquisition of supplies or services where the aggregate dollar amount is less than $15,000. A small purchase falls between $15,000 and $350,000 with relatively simple and informal procurement procedures. Procurement thresholds apply to monies budgeted and/or paid to an individual vendor throughout the lifetime of the grant, not individual line items in your budget. If a single vendor will supply one or more of the line items in your budget, and those line items add up to $15,000 or more, you must follow small purchase procedures. For example, if the $10,000 line item for security cameras and the $7,000 line item for an intercom system in your budget will both be provided by the same vendor, you must follow the small purchase procedures, as these line items add up to $17,000, which falls within the simplified acquisition threshold. You cannot pay a single vendor $15,000 or more without first obtaining multiple quotes or proposals from vendors. When is obtaining multiple quotes required? You must seek at least 3 quotations from different vendors prior to making a vendor selection and moving forward with that portion of your project if an expense is considered a small purchase. Again, that's between $15,000 and $350,000. Obtaining multiple quotes for a micro purchase is optional. Should I upload my quotes to eGrants? No. It's easier to build your budget in eGrants if you have quotations to reference, but you shouldn't upload them. If PCCD needs to see your quotations for any reason, we will contact you to request them. What if I struggle to obtain multiple quotes for a small purchase? A proposed formal advertised or competitive negotiated procurement for which only one bid or proposal is received is deemed to be a non-competitive procurement. If this occurs, a PCCD sole source approval must be secured. Please reach out to the fiscal contact listed on your grant for assistance, as special rules may apply. It is important to note that non-competitive procurement is strongly discouraged, and it is expected that normal procurement procedures will be followed unless extenuating and justifiable circumstances apply. Now that we've gone over procurement, let's take a look at fiscal reporting requirements. In eGrants, a quarterly fiscal report can be generated up to 5 days prior to the end of the quarter. An interim fiscal report can be submitted at any time if you would like to report purchases prior to a quarter's end. An interim report can be useful if you want to get reimbursed for purchases sooner than waiting for a quarter to close. Before creating and submitting a fiscal report, be sure you have everything you need. You'll need a list of purchases that fall within your budget in eGrants. You can only report expenses against the line items in your current approved budget. You'll also need invoices provided by your vendors for goods or services rendered during the reporting period. An invoice must be dated within the project period, and the invoice date should fall within the quarter of which you are reporting the expenses. Lastly, you'll need to provide proof of payment to your vendor. Examples of proof of payment include an itemized receipt, an invoice from a vendor recording payments made towards the balance due, or a deposited check image that you can download from your online bank account. This is what a fiscal report looks like if you are unfamiliar. The top table in the fiscal report outlines exactly which funding source is to be used for the reported expenses. If your grant has a cash match requirement, you will be splitting up your total expenses between your state award, which is noted on the state line, and cash match, which is noted on the cash match line. If your state award was $25,000 or less, you do not have a cash match requirement and will only report expenses against the state line in this top table. The bottom table tells us exactly which line items you are using to categorize your expenses. You can only report expenses that align with line items in your approved budget. If you click the blue hyperlinks under the Budget Categories column, that budget category will open to display all line items that are currently in your budget. You can then enter expenses to the appropriate line items as needed. Let's go over a brief overview of what each column in the fiscal report means. Cumulative expenses as of date. This column automatically calculates all expenses you've incurred and reported prior to the current reporting period by compiling data from your previous approved fiscal reports. Expenses paid this period. This column outlines the expenses incurred during the current reporting period. An expense occurred if you made a payment against an invoice from a vendor. This is the column that you will most often be using in your fiscal reports. In the top table of the report, you must physically enter data in this column to tell us how the expenses are to be funded by your grant. In the bottom table, you will instead click on the blue hyperlinks shown on the previous slide and enter expenses on individual line items. The expenses paid this period column will auto-populate in the bottom table for you based on what you enter on each line item. Total cumulative expenses. This column automatically calculates expenses incurred on the grant, including the expenses for the current reporting period. This will update as you add expenses to your report. Outstanding subgrantee obligations. This column is intended to capture any invoices received during the project period, not just this reporting period, that have not yet been paid. This column does not automatically carry over from previous reports and needs to be entered with each report if older expenses are still unpaid at the time a new report is created. This column is not to be used to outline the remaining budget for your line items. It should only be used to show how much you currently owe your vendors for issued invoices. Total funds received to date. The total amount of payments you've received up to the current reporting period are included in this column. eGrants counts funds reported against your cash match line as payments, as though you've paid yourself cash during the project. This can sometimes be confusing for grantees. You will only receive payments from PCCD totaling the cumulative expenses showing on the state line in the top table of your approved fiscal reports. Unexpended cash. This column is auto-calculated by eGrants and is used by PCCD staff. It shows us how much we owe to the grantee on the state line and how much cash match will still need to be reported if we approve the report. I recommend grantees to ignore this column as it normally causes unnecessary confusion. Here are some important reminders when it comes to fiscal reporting. Be sure to report actual expenses. Your reported expenses should match the amounts on the receipts and invoices. Do not just report the amount that you have budgeted for any particular line item. When you created your budget, we consider that to be your best estimate of your future expenses. Your fiscal reports should outline your actual expenses. We do expect to see some fluctuations between your budgeted amounts and your reported amounts for any given line item within reason. If you have a cash match requirement as part of your approved application, you must spread out your cash match throughout your fiscal reports. As a rule of thumb, your cumulative cash match must amount to greater than or equal to your budgeted cash match percentage for your grant. I will provide some quick math tips for calculating your required cash match on the next slide. Be sure to include invoices and proof of payment as attachments. You can also include any other supporting documentation that you would like in order to help us better understand how you are reporting your expenses. Be sure to follow procurement guidelines for all purchases. The blue totals at the bottom of the top table must also match the totals in blue in the bottom table. You physically cannot submit a fiscal report if the totals don't match. If this happens, you will receive an error message in red lettering at the top of your report that explains this. Remember, obligations are things that you've been invoiced for but have not yet paid. Be sure to attach the invoice for any obligation listed in your report as well. Lastly, do not report any expenses beyond your total budget for your grant. In this example, the grantee should be sure to only report expenses totaling $225,000 or less. For step-by-step guidance on creating and submitting a fiscal report, be sure to check out our fiscal report walkthrough guide on our website. Figuring out how much cash match to include in your report can be tricky. To help you, we've provided a quick and easy calculation for both a 33% cash match and a 50% cash match, as you can see here on this slide. Once you perform the appropriate calculation for your specific grant, you'll want to round the result up or down as necessary. You can round to the nearest whole number or to the hundredths. After you calculate the minimum amount of cash match you need to include in the report, you can then calculate how much to report on the state line by taking the total expenses paid this period and subtracting the cash match amount that you just calculated. This state amount is what you would be reimbursed by PCCD if your report is approved. To check your math, you can multiply your state amount by your required cash match percentage, either 33% or 50%, and the result should equal the cash match amount you initially calculated. Note that if your grant is $25,000 or less, this slide does not apply to you. Here is an example of what supporting documentation could look like that you could provide to PCCD to help staff figure out how your reported expenses align with your eGrants budget. This is especially useful in cases like this, where a single invoice contains multiple items that correspond with several different line items in your budget. Providing similar documentation is likely to greatly reduce our review time and minimize the need to return reports due to confusion or inability to match up expenses. Supporting documentation is not required upon submission, but if your expenses may be complicated, just remember that supporting documentation can help fiscal staff determine if your report can be approved and reimbursed much quicker. Help us help you by providing us with everything we need to clearly understand and follow your expenses. Time and effort reporting is essentially how you keep track of the hours worked for positions budgeted under the personnel budget category of a grant. If you have a personnel budget, you are required to submit time and effort reports as an attachment to your fiscal report. This documentation should clearly outline how much time the employee worked and how much time is being reported against the grant. Included in time and effort reporting should be the employee's name, the dates and hours worked by the employee, the hours dedicated to grant-related activities, and the employee's signature as well as the supervisor's signature. Note that if a position is listed in your grant at 100%, meaning the full salary is being funded by the grant, then a dual-signed time attestation would meet the personnel reporting requirements. Fiscal staff will return fiscal reports if there is one or more issues preventing us from being able to approve your report as submitted. Prior to returning a report, we create what are called corrective actions. These corrective actions should tell you exactly what you need to change and/or provide to us in order for that issue to be resolved. To see why your fiscal report was returned, you'll want to first log into eGrants and navigate to your grant's fiscal reports. Reports are able to be accessed by clicking the Monitoring tab in the upper menu. You'll then want to click on the hyperlinked report date to open the report that was returned. Once you are in the report, scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on the View Corrective Actions button. This will display a list of corrective actions and directions as to how to fix them. You'll want to follow the instructions provided in the corrective actions before resubmitting your report. Otherwise, we will have to return it again for the same issues. A fiscal report will not be approved or reimbursed until all corrective actions have been resolved and closed. Now I'm going to hand things back over to Betsy to talk about project modification requests, otherwise known as PMRs.
There may be occasions in which a modification is needed to your budget or program to improve the effectiveness of grant activities. For nonprofit security grants, this may include a change between budget categories. For example, if you budgeted $10,000 for cameras and $15,000 for consultants, but you end up spending $5,000 for installation and the actual cost of the cameras ended up being $20,000, this would be a change between supplies and operating expenses line item and the consultant line item that exceeds the 10% threshold. In this case, a PMR is needed. PCCD does allow small changes to the original budget if they directly relate to the approved expenses. In our previous example, a grantee may have realized that new wiring was needed for the installation of the cameras. A PMR could be submitted to reduce the cost of the cameras, and a new line item related to the wiring and installation of wiring could be added. We would highly encourage you to reach out to your program staff first, however, before adding any new line items to ensure that they will be approved. If you end up needing additional time to spend the funds, a PMR must be created to extend the end date of the grant. With any PMR, it must be submitted several weeks prior to the end date, since PCCD must process these before a grant ends. Unfortunately, any PMRs that are not submitted, reviewed, and sent to the Comptroller's office prior to the end date will not be awarded. Rachel will now provide an overview of fiscal accountability and monitoring.
It is important to maintain fiscal accountability throughout the lifetime of your grant. Fiscal accountability when it comes to managing a PCCD grant includes only reporting expenses that are in your approved budget and doing so against the appropriate line items, providing backup documentation for your expenses as required, maintaining an accounting system that tracks revenues and expenditures for each PCCD grant separately, submitting timely fiscal reports and only requesting actual expenditures for reimbursement. And lastly, cooperating and providing all requested documentation if your grant is selected for fiscal monitoring. PCCD monitors grantees to ensure that grant funds are expended in accordance with the approved grant budget and that the grantee complied with relevant federal and state regulations and guidelines. Additionally, PCCD monitors to ensure that the project is implemented as described in the application and is achieving the appropriate and expected results. On a quarterly basis, PCCD randomly selects grantees to monitor. PCCD staff may also request a program to be monitored if there are concerns with how the funding is being spent. Grantees that are identified as higher risk based on past monitoring or the newness of the agency may be monitored more frequently. If a grantee is unable to provide appropriate documentation to support expenditures or program operations, they may have their funds put on hold and their risk level elevated. If you are selected for monitoring, you will receive an email that provides instructions on what line items are being monitored and the time period. It's important that you respond to these requests as soon as possible with all of the required documentation. If you do not provide the requested information by the deadline, your grant may be put on a payment hold until all documents have been provided and are approved, and your risk level may be reassessed. Finally, we want to highlight some important requirements related to your grant funding.
You may be seeing a theme here, but reviewing the applicant's manual and standard subgrant conditions will provide you with all of the requirements that you need to meet. Abiding by these requirements minimizes the chances of your agency ever having to return funding back to us. Next, only request reimbursement for funding listed in your eGrants budget detail section. If you are unsure if an expense can be reimbursed, please contact your program and fiscal contact listed within eGrants. Third, attach all invoices and receipts to your quarterly fiscal report. This assists you with keeping track of your documentation and allows our fiscal staff to process reimbursement quickly. Please make sure all quarterly program and fiscal reports are submitted in a timely manner. And last but not least, please update all contacts in eGrants to ensure that PCCD is able to get in contact with you. The eGrants system can only email the addresses listed within the system. In addition, please note that we are only able to discuss grant information with individuals listed within your grant application. Due to security reasons, we are unable to provide information or answer questions related to your specific grant application with outside staff. To ensure that you receive credit for this training, please enter the word summer into your first quarterly program report and certify that all staff have listened to this presentation.
Being able to locate your PCCD program and fiscal grant contacts is important so that you know who to reach out to if you have any questions throughout the lifetime of your grant. Knowing this information is especially important if you have multiple PCCD grants, as there is a good chance that your PCCD grant contacts will not be the same across all grants. To find out who your PCCD grant contacts are, simply log into eGrants, open your grant application, and click on the main summary information link. This will open up the main summary page of your application. As you can see here, your PCCD program and fiscal contacts are listed just underneath your agency's grant contacts. Be sure to check who your program and fiscal staff contacts are before reaching out with questions to make sure you're contacting the right person. As a reminder, you should reach out to your program staff contact for all program-related questions, such as if you'd like to know if something would be eligible for reimbursement under your grant or not. Your fiscal contact can help you with anything related to financials or procurement.
If you have any additional questions about what was presented today or need assistance throughout the grant period, please reach out to your program and/or fiscal contact that's listed within eGrants. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. And remember that the code word to enter in your first program report is summer.